Hi, everybody. I am Hayes Davis. I'm the CEO and co-founder of GradientWorks, and I'm super excited to be here today because we have some really great panelists to talk about some really big challenges. So what we're going to be focusing on today is what it's like to build a RevOps organization during exponential growth. And we've got some folks here who are all experiencing at their current organizations hypergrowth, I would say, right now. And so for those of you who are joining us who've been in a RevOps role, we hope to cover some things about how do you deal with processes as everything blows up all around you, as things get bigger. What are some of the new things that you'll have to deal with reporting, analytics, metrics, that kind of thing. And then two of my favorite topics in this part of the world, which is how do you deal with stakeholders, both new and old and changing as your company changes? And then lastly, building a team. And so we're going to cover all of those things and more today. It should be a pretty free-flowing conversation with these folks. But what I'd like to do is turn it over to the other panelists today so that we can have them introduce themselves. And I'd like, so Lizzie, we'll start with you. And if you would, share a little bit about your background, what Monte Carlo does, and then also share just a little bit about your span of control and kind of what RevOps means in your organization, because it's always a little bit different everywhere. So I'll start with Lizzie and go to Drew and then Marcos.
Thanks, Hayes. Thank you, GradientWorks, for having myself and the rest of the group here today. Really excited. These are some really great topics. I feel like I actually have a lot to learn too from the panel. So thank you for having me. My name is Lizzie. I think I'm Elizabeth formally on Zoom, but Lizzie's absolutely fine. You can probably sense a bit of an accent. I'm actually Australian. I moved over to the States about 2 years ago. My path to revenue operations, I think like most people, was a little bit unusual. I actually spent the first 5 years of my career consulting at PwC in a variety of different roles. Really wanted to make the jump into tech, and I actually took the sales route. So I was an SDR. I then jumped into SDR management for about a year and a half, 2 years, and realized that what I loved was the operational side. And so I actually made the jump into sales ops at my current company, Monte Carlo, and I now lead the function there. Monte Carlo is not the town. It's actually the country, I guess. It's actually named after a kind of statistical methodology. What we do is data observability. So if you can think about observability tools in your application monitoring layer, like New Relic, we effectively take those principles and apply them to data quality. So we work with an incredible array of customers, all the way from New York Times and CNN down to Farmer's Dog and some smaller startups, and we really help them monitor for anomalies in their data, and so that they can eventually trust that the data that they use to sort of form business decisions. Sales ops or RevOps at Monte Carlo, just like any small startup, we're Series C. We've got about 80 to 90 employees and a sales team of about 25. And so for us, that spans a little bit of marketing ops, marketing operations, sort of CRM and technical administration, ownership of new and existing tools. It also spans enablement as well. And so it's fairly broad. I think with small startups, you sort of end up jumping into a handful of different projects. But we're very much in scale mode right now. I'm a team of one, and so we'll love to talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, it's a quick intro for me. Thanks, Hayes.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about a team of one. I think a lot of people in this mode right now are starting as a team of one and then trying to build from there. So, well, let's jump over to Drew.
Sure. So my name is Andrew DeJoqua. Friends call me Drew, so Hayes, you can call me Andrew. But essentially, I am the head at GTM Hub of revenue operations and pre-sales, which is a little bit of an odd combination. Similar to Lizzie, I have a bit of a weird path to how I got into RevOps, but I actually started my career as a journalist and then got into marketing and advertising around the rise of social media, and then got into tech on that side of things. So this is now my 6th startup since then. And I had been in hyper growth multiple times, but primarily more on the pre-sales or solution consulting side of the house. So kind of marrying up my technical acumen with my love of storytelling. I got into the revenue operations side of things for a couple of reasons. One being that I have a lot of passion for thinking through what the end-to-end process should look like, right? And so I'm a very process-oriented person. I love to think about how do you execute a very customer-oriented selling process that aligns what your products and services do to what their needs are. And I think there are a lot of ways that operations can help bring that to life. And then the other side of it is I really like the financial side of it. So I help manage our multi-million-dollar budget for the revenue org. So I manage the P&L for that and do a lot of the FP&A personally. So our span of control, or my span of control here, is around the tech stack for the revenue org. We work very closely with marketing as well as business operations and finance operations, but we are very focused on the sales and partner side of things at GTM Hub within Revenue Ops. GTM Hub itself is a strategy, development, deployment, execution, and an optimization platform. We are focused very much on the OKR methodology, but not necessarily tied just to that. So we help a lot of the largest companies in the world, or really any organization, kind of help develop their strategy and bring that to life and get everybody aligned and drive transparency and accountability. And that's a mission that I'm very excited about and happy to be part of. So thanks for having me.
Very cool. And I'm eager to hear about, as we get into some of the process and execution stuff, maybe how OKRs can help drive that. I know I've been at a couple of companies where we've been able to use that methodology. So Marcos.
Yeah, I'm Marcos Hinojosa. I'm Omnipresent's Senior Revenue of Operations and Business Apps function. I've been there for a little bit, I think around a year now. How I got into revenue operations, similar to Lizzie, I started out as an SDR at a company called Trendkite down in Austin, Texas, and kind of transitioned from an SDR route to a pre-SDR manager, handling some employees that were looking to get into the SDR route, but might not have been ready. And I was able to kind of make the jump to more of the sales revenue operations role by having some great managers who kind of saw a lot in me to be in that side of things and pushed me that way. Towards the end of my career at Trendkite, was able to transition into more of a solidified revenue operations role, and then made that transition over to Omnipresent, where similar to Lizzie, started out as a team of one. Luckily, no longer a team of one, so managed a team of 2 other Salesforce administrators. And then a little bit background on Omnipresent on what we do. We are a SaaS HR business, essentially allowing companies, small startups, high growth startups, all the way up to your enterprise level to hire anyone, anywhere, anyway, is kind of our motto. So if you're looking to hire either a Salesforce administrator or a back-end engineer in Canada, but don't have the legal entity to do so, we kind of step in and provide the legal whereabouts on how to do that. We won't go out and find the candidates for you, but we will be there side by side to make sure there's no issues in getting the right people for you.
But one thing that I think is kind of a theme here is that, and this is true of a lot of people I talk to in RevOps, no one seems to have a straight line into RevOps. You know, you don't go to school to do RevOps. It's a thing that you start to find yourself like I did. I was a software engineer originally, a startup founder, and I found myself drawn to it as after my startup was acquired, just because it was a huge area of focus for how we were going to grow the business. And you know, I've always been pretty operationally minded, but didn't, also did not come to this from a straight path. So let's go ahead and jump into the discussion. I appreciate everybody sharing all of that to start with, so we all have a good sense of context for where you're coming from. So I want to talk about a really important aspect of ops, which is that you're constantly surrounded by dumpster fires. So I'm just going to start there. And what I mean by that, in case anyone doesn't get that reference, is especially when you're scaling, you're constantly dealing with processes and things that are just breaking down, right? Everything is changing kind of all at once. You're hiring tons of people. Things that worked yesterday don't work today. And one of the things that I think is really, really challenging there is you're going to have a lot of folks coming to you and saying, hey, we need to put out this fire, or we need to do this thing, right? And so one of the things I wanted to do, and maybe start with Andrew on this, because I'm not allowed to go with Drew yet. Maybe after the end of this, well, I can refer to you as Drew. How do you prioritize all that work? And I'd love to hear specific recommendations for saying you've got more than you can handle as a team. Just by definition. So how do you make sure you're doing the right things at the right time?
Yeah, and you can call me Drew, it's okay. But I would say, I tend to think about prioritization in terms of there's tactical prioritization and strategic prioritization. And when you're in a hyper growth startup, it can be really hard to get to that level of strategic prioritization. Don't worry, there's a plug for OKRs coming shortly. But when we talk about the tactical prioritization, one of the first things I did when I got here, and I fortunately was not a team of one. I had a team member that I came on board with, and he had done a great job before I got here at building a lot of the tools and systems. But he was just getting completely bombarded by requests from left and right. And I think one of the biggest issues when it comes to that is that RevOps is dealing with not just a high volume of requests, but they're coming from so many different angles. And the other end, like every person that's asking for something doesn't realize all the other requests or all the other people that are making requests. And so one of the first things I did was I took an Excel template that I've used before, and I had this member of the team map out every task and every project that he was working on or that he was being asked to work on with an estimate of how long it was going to take to complete it. And I had this template automatically calculate how many working hours, accounting for holidays and vacation, that there were going to be in any rolling time period. And we got all the people who were making demands of his time onto a call and walked through them. And we just had a hard conversation about, this is the cutoff for anything to be done in the next 30 days or the next 60 days or next 90 days. And we basically said, we have to make hard choices about what can wait until next month or the month after, or what are we going to drop entirely? And if you have a request, you have to understand that it's going to be stack ranked against this list, and we have to figure out what gets pushed down. And so if you're going to say something's a high priority, we then have to go talk to these 3 or 4 other people who are waiting on something and see if we can reprioritize that. And so doing that and getting that shared understanding, I think that works for 3 or 4 months maybe before people start to forget, if you're lucky, and then you have to do that again. And that's where I think being a little bit more strategic in how you prioritize is helpful. I would say on the tactical piece, it's helpful to have a couple of heuristics, right? I mean, one is I say no matter what, even if it's the CRO asking for something to be done, if a problem pops up that is preventing a rep from closing a deal, right? That is like the number one thing that you have to take care of. That the CRO's report can wait. But when it comes to strategic prioritization, we sell an OKR platform. So I'd be remiss to not mention that, we eat our own dog food, drink our own champagne, choose the phrase you like best. But we use OKRs to help manage that. And it has given the team a level of permission to be able to So sort of push back and say, hey, we all agreed as a group collectively that these are our goals and our strategic initiatives that we're going to focus on this quarter and this year. And what you're asking me to do doesn't align to those, right? And so I'd have to deprioritize work that does to do that. And when you have that conversation, you sort of come to a bit of a shared understanding that helps with that prioritization.
That makes a lot of sense. Marcos, I know this is something you and I have talked about in the past a little bit, dealing with that type of prioritization. Anything to add to Drew's approach there that you feel like you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, he kind of touched on a few things that I've learned and taken in my time as a RevOps manager. Is you also always have to remember that at the end of the day, you have to handle things that are going to drive revenue for the business and prioritize that top of mind. So, I think Drew hit it right on the nose when he said, if there's something that's preventing a rep from closing a deal, that's what you handle first. And so that's what you do tactically. And then strategically, I've always looked at it, particularly when things break. I look at it in a quarter basis. If I fix this, or if we fix this, will this break within the next 3 months, or will this break in the next quarter? And if the answer is yes, then at that point, I tend to kind of communicate to the internal clients that this is probably not going to be smart for us to spend however many hours fixing this, knowing that within the quarter we're going to have to find a new solution to whatever we're trying to fix. But then I think you also have to keep in mind when prioritization, what's your business's goals? What are your revenue goals? What are the things that are going to help drive the revenue portion of the business to those goals? And if you can identify those, whatever strategic projects that are really going to drive the business there, and keep those prioritized top of mind, that's really where you can communicate to internal users of the why. Maybe some tactical pieces for them are not getting picked up. It's because to kind of keep them in mind that you might have a 25 million ARR goal or a 10 million ARR goal, and what's going to actually get your team there. And so that's kind of how we look at it in prioritization. In the sense of that, I mean, there's a few other things we kind of hide behind the cloak of a ticketing system. We go through we use Jira and a sprint process, and if we don't get the ticket and we don't get the sprint, we communicated it out to managers. This is what's going in, and there's no there's no loud cries from internal clients that why is my ticket not in there. Then that's kind of where if we need to, we'll lean in on that and be able to say, hey, we brought this to your attention. There was no discussion to be had. This doesn't really seem like a big prioritization for you in the business, but maybe we can fit it in down the line, kind of things like that.
I think, and Lizzie, I want to ask you this question because I think this is really critical. We talked about kind of the strategic priorities of the business. We talked about the tactical, like this thing is on fire right now and preventing us from closing a deal, right? But I think one of the things that sometimes the business doesn't have a full understanding of is like maybe laying the foundation operationally, like the things that you really need to get right where you're trying to make an investment in the early days, right? And so I'm curious from your perspective, what is it as you're setting off on, okay, we've got to scale, like, what do you think are the things that you really need to get right early on? And, maybe as a bonus, like, how do you communicate that and get everybody on board with investing the time and laying a foundation like that?
Yeah. So the way that we've thought about this in the last year is actually in the stage of the customer life cycle. And so in the very early days, for Monte Carlo, when I joined, actually the primary challenge we needed to solve was top of funnel, or actually like building pipeline for the 1 or 2 AEs that we had hired. And so that requires a few things right off the top of anyone in this room's head. It's, you need marketing ops support or some sort of way to track leads, reporting mechanism for MQLs. You need to sort of like roll out the tools and systems for an SDR team to actually go and execute, and then the systems and tools to like track the progress. And so for us, that was foundationally important, not only to my head of sales, but my CEO. And so I was sort of like very lucky enough to receive feedback that we'd actually been able to solve that problem. We tripled pipeline in terms of net number of meetings within like 3 or 4 months. And they were really, really happy with that. And so I think it goes back to this point of like understanding what your most senior stakeholders really, really care about, and then being able to like execute on that. I think if I had joined and said, hey, we need to go and work on deal desk and order management, there would have been a massive, massive disconnect. And so if you think about the life cycle of the customer within the life cycle of the maturity of the company, that was the biggest problem to solve maybe like 9-12 months ago. Now we're actually, we're transitioning into middle or bottom of the funnel. So how does sales or revenue ops like help enforce sales rigor with like certain fields in Salesforce? We are also responsible for sales enablement, so making those people, ensuring they're getting to productive capacity. And then obviously it will move on to deal desk, order management, and success ops down the funnel. But it's interesting, what I've seen in my experience is that because of the volume at the top of our customer lifecycle in terms of like when we first speak to a customer and they download a piece of content or join a webinar, for example, the volume there is that we've had to be a lot more mature at those early stages compared to where success or renewals is at right now. It's like much less mature, and so I think operations, in my experience, has kind of like followed that life cycle. So it's sort of halfway in the middle now.
I mean, that makes a ton of sense. You have to map to where you are as a business. And I think there's a thing I see when I talk to a lot of ops folks, and I feel the same pain, right? Is you look around and you say, oh, I just know this could be better, but we're not going to make it better right now because it's not where the company is focused, right? So like, yeah, there might be some issues with customer success handoffs or something like that, right? But like, you only are doing a few of those because you haven't figured out top of funnel, right? And so those are the kinds of things where people have to make those trade-offs. And I think one of the things that I see is kind of a sense of like, if we're going to scale, we got to automate every single process, and we've got to do, all that we've got to tackle like all these problems at once. And so I'm curious, and maybe Drew, you have something you could share here. It's just like, when do you decide, like, okay, we're going to prioritize and actually like spend some cycles on automating something versus, we're gonna wait a little bit, and that'll become a bigger problem, and we'll let future us deal with that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I can give a real world example of this where last year when I joined GTM Hub, one of the challenges we had was around just commission management. So that falls under our purview, and I don't manage the payroll aspect of it, but I have to get that over to our CFO and her team to be able to manage and get payroll done. And we had just transitioned to doing commission payments on a monthly basis from, I think it was quarterly before that. And it was a painful process, right? We had someone in business operations who was pulling a report and then manually entering data into a spreadsheet, and it was error prone. It was taking hours and hours of her time every month, and it was for a pretty small team, right? But you had to pull all the deal data and calculate it and make sure that you were using the right percentages for the right role. And as we started to layer in additional functions, we had pre-sales, and we have SDRs and BDRs, and how do we compensate everybody the right way? It just got to be really cumbersome. And selfishly, I mean, it was taking hours and hours of my time every month. That was just a distraction from other things that I could be doing. So it's not hard to put together the hard dollar ROI just time savings on something like that, that's usually not enough to really justify it. But it's one of those things where I think you can look at something and say, hey, future me can deal with that and be comfortable with that. But I think it's worthwhile to look at a year ahead. If we are growing at the pace that we expect to be growing, can future me really afford that? Or is this going to be a problem that just gets exponentially bigger? And so we brought on a commission management software that has massively simplified our lives. And when we actually did to test it, we ran it against our year to date, and we found all kinds of errors and things like that. And they were relatively small, but I think the threshold of where I made the decision to pull the trigger on this is it's not just my time, but Hayes, I think we were talking about this and saying it's like when you start talking about messing with the sales rep's money, then you've got a problem, right? And that was really what it came down to is if one of the most important jobs of a leader in any hyper growth environment is recruiting and retention, right? Maybe the most important thing you can do. And you're not going to be able to do that really effectively if people don't have confidence in the tools and systems that you use when it comes down to something like making sure they get paid what they should be paid. Right. So that is, I think, a good threshold is that going to impact our ability to, like, are people not going to want to work here because our tools and systems are such a mess, right? Is it going to prevent us from closing business? I mean, an analyst's time, that's not that compelling, right? That you can live with that pain, but that you have to think about a year from now, if we reach the scale that we're hoping to scale, how much worse is this problem going to be?
We see that on the Gradient Works side. I did actually talk much about what Gradient Works does, but what we really see ourselves as doing is our platform helps connect intent to action, right? So everything from lead routing to making sure that reps have the right accounts to work, to making sure that you're able to move demos that get set through to get those assigned to account executives, those types of things. And so we find with a number of our customers that that's a very high velocity part of their business, typically, as they're working on the top of the funnel. And automation becomes necessary there, because if you're not fairly allocating the work to those reps, then it's equivalent to messing with their comp, right? Because there's a sense of, well, everybody needs an equal opportunity to be able to work their opportunities, or to work their accounts, or to work inbound leads. Well, I want to jump over here and actually talk about sort of an elephant in the room that we haven't really we've kind of hinted at but haven't really talked about, and that is our good friends stakeholders. So and honestly, until I was at a large company where I was at previously, I didn't think all that much about stakeholders. But when you have stakeholders become incredibly important. You have RevOps sitting at the nexus of everything from, obviously everything about go-to-market. You have it sitting, related to product marketing. You have it sitting obviously very closely tied to finance. There's legal aspects. There's all of those pieces. And so you got a lot of folks who have a stake in how the go-to-market process works, obviously, and they all have their own set of interests and things that they're trying to prioritize. And so I'd like to maybe start with Lizzie on this one. Or actually, no, let's start with Marcos, because I want to ask him about this. How do you manage those stakeholders? Not so much what we talked about previously of like managing the workload or setting those expectations, but really how do you approach ensuring that you maintain good relationships, good lines of communication, and that people are feeling like you're effectively serving all the aspects of the business that have a stake in what you do?
Yeah, this is actually one that we at Omnipresent are really battling hard at the moment. I wouldn't say just revenue operations, but as a whole. But we really see it with RevOps only because we're a fully remote business, and we'll always be fully remote. We have to deal with time zones, communication across departments, managing, making sure that we're not siloing within the business, and making sure that people aren't just suffering in silence. So managing stakeholders, we always have to over communicate in RevOps, and particularly at Omnipresent, I found this to be more impactful than any other role that I've ever done. It's always over communicate, and always be willing to listen. So you're gonna always, it's always fine to spend a couple minutes listening to your stakeholders. What's their problems? What's actually causing headaches and issues for them, and being able to identify through some of the BS that gets spewed out, and kind of sift through it, and kind of actually find that at its core what is really causing the headaches. I think that's kind of key. But one of the things that I tend to do is I tend to separate my stakeholders. I tend to put them into kind of two buckets. Who are my tactical stakeholders and who are my strategic stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders that are going to give me the big picture? Where we're driving to for end of year goals, where we're driving to for 2-year, 5-year goals. And then who are the stakeholders that are going to help me understand, where are the tactical breakdowns? So I tend to create allies in both groups. So in our tactical side, I have about a set of 5 or 6 sales reps that are our tactical allies, that our RevOps teams can kind of go to and say, okay, hey, we're testing out this process that is coming out, and we need some assistance just to kind of smokescreen some of the work that we've done. Tell us why this shouldn't be built, or why it should be built. And it's kind of giving ownership back to the stakeholders. Hey, we're going to do what you're telling us to do to an extent, but we're also going to put you in charge to tell us, hey, this is not great, this is great, and things like that. So I try to bring in the stakeholders and make it as much of a collaboration as possible, and make it seem, or not say seem, but make the ownership a part of them. Don't try to be simply a ticketing system to where stakeholders can go to and say, hey, here's my problem, fix it. Drive the discussion, drive the collaboration, and then drive the ownership between them, because then that will help them better understand some of the problems that you're dealing with within RevOps, but also help them understand that sometimes it's okay to be told no, that we're not going to do this because we're doing XYZ this month. And then it's a little bit easier of a conversation with them.
I want to talk about a particular type of stakeholder that I think starts to crop up. I like your taxonomy, Marcos, between your tactical folks who can help you see what's on the ground, and then your strategic folks who ultimately are going to give you that big picture. But I think there's a particular one that crops up in a scaling kind of organization where you're going through some level of transformation. There's the new stakeholder, right? You get a new person, whether they're strategic or tactical or whatever, and they probably are coming into the business with some real aggressive targets. They've got lots of things that they care about. They've probably been hired to go 10x something, right? Whatever it is, and they're probably super high capacity people, right? Who are there and ready to get things done. And so they probably have they come with all of those good ideas around how to do that stuff, but maybe less of an understanding of the specifics of the business, or why decisions have been made in the past, and that kind of thing. And so I think it's really important to have a strategy for onboarding that kind of stakeholder, right? Helping them sort of understand, helping you understand them understand you, and be able to move forward as quickly as you possibly can with some of the things that they're trying to achieve. So Lizzie, I'm kind of curious about that, You all are, growing really fast as a team right now. So I imagine you've probably encountered that species of stakeholder a bit. So what are your thoughts for how to manage folks like that?
Yeah. I hope, I don't think there are any Monte Carlians on the call, but we had two sales managers start on the same day. So spare a prayer for Lizzie 3 months ago. And the exactly what you said, Hayes, effectively happened. They arrived with the best intentions of wanting to have immediate impact, not only on the team performance front, but strategically what they wanted to implement. And I think a few things, I certainly didn't do this incredibly well, but I think some of the lessons that I learned are like, one, upfront, you have to establish credibility. And I think there is absolutely no better way than just like the quality of work that you produce and the way that you interact with people. Everything will fall apart unless you have credibility and people and those stakeholders believe that you do good work. I think the other thing too is it's really helpful to have higher levels of leadership than yourself that are resetting expectations. So my boss, who's a head of revenue, one of his like notes to people who are joining is like, park your expectations. You might have an idea of the way that things should look. I always say like dial that back, particularly at our stage of startup, by like 80%. So a lot of people are coming from 400 or 500, if not a few thousand employee companies. It's like going to look very, very different here. And then I think the last piece, interestingly, we had a sort of situation this past week where I was sitting in between the middle of sales managers who are trying to drive a certain outcome that will improve the lives of AEs, and then an SDR manager who is sort of a little bit defensive about their reps. And that's probably a situation of dichotomy that a lot of people find themselves in. The way that I thought about solving for that was reiterating Marcos's point about over communication. Tell each of those stakeholders when they're getting some piece in terms of this whole program that we're trying to roll out, tell each stakeholder when they've won, and be really, really be very clear about, hey, this is what you asked for. We've actually been able to deliver that for you. We need you to make a compromise on parts B and C. And that I definitely didn't do particularly well probably 3 months ago, but starting to learn that, communicating when people have won, particularly those kinds of personalities, like you'll see that a lot in sales management. You just do it. It's where I spend a lot of my time and energy. Showing them when they won is really, really important. But just to reiterate, you have to establish credibility, get senior leadership to help reset those people's expectations. I have actually given feedback about sort of like my peers who are stakeholders to our mutual boss that I think they're focusing on the wrong things. So like, don't be afraid to pass that upward. That might sound a little controversial, but it does work. And then 3, like over communicate when you've let people win. It sounds a little political, but I think these things are actually. So
I think the job of RevOps, especially a senior RevOps leader, is a political job. I mean, it really is, in that you just have to balance all of these competing needs. And I think we should make peace with that, right? We want to be like, okay, we're ops people, we're here to just get things done, right? But I think the reality is, if things get done in the forest and nobody hears it, right? Like, that doesn't help you, right? So you need to show like, hey, we're delivering wins. And I think that's super important. One other thing that I found helped me when I was in that scenario as well was just someone a long time ago told me just assume positive intent with people. And I think, coming from a place of empathy of saying like, I know you're trying to achieve these things and you have these things that are super important to you. And I totally get that. And I get where you're coming from. You're not trying to make my life harder. You're trying to go succeed at what you've been asked to do. I always felt like that kind of helped ground me when I'm like, stop asking, we'll get to it. I promise. Drew, did you have anything to add with that?
Yeah, I was going to say, when it comes to new stakeholders, I've got a pretty big one in that we have a new CMO who just started on Monday.
Awesome.
And so we're very excited about that. I don't know how public it is, who it is, so I'm not going to spoil anybody's news, but when it goes to the piece about credibility, I think Lizzie said something there that really resonated with me, because when I first met with our new CMO, I kind of had this thought that if it's an opportunity to steer into the areas of improvement or the opportunities that we have to make things better. And this goes to the credibility piece, where if I had a new stakeholder came in and I just was like, oh, things are great, that what we built is perfect, then I look like an idiot, right? So, and it's not about all how much of an idiot I look, because I do plenty to further that image every day. But it's about that credibility piece, right? And also I think helping them understand that there is a priority and a method to the madness, that like, hey, we know this is an issue, but we've got all these other things that we've been working on that have prevented us from getting there. So it doesn't look like you've just missed what's really going on. So I think that's a big part of it. I also think what Marcos said earlier about kind of thinking about the strategic and tactical stakeholders. I think RevOps, it really is kind of this, if you look at the Venn diagram of a lot of different functions, it's kind of like right there in the overlap. And I think we can play an important role of almost like context translators, right? I work very closely with our COO and CFO, and when we were designing our comp plans for this year, as part of a budgeting exercise, we had to make a decision. I think we have one of the best comp plans in the industry that we're very proud of having put together, but we had to do a change to it that could be perceived as potentially negative, it as part of a lot of good things that we implemented for this year. But working with the COO and CFO, I was able to understand the business context of, what metric are we trying to protect that allows us to be an attractive investment opportunity for VCs or potentially Wall Street in the future, that is really driving why we have to make a change to our comp plans to keep us attractive, right? And with that context, now when I rolled out that plan and introduced it to the sales leaders for them to be able to deliver that to their teams, I was able to give them that extra context and the why behind why we did it. And it was like, I feel like that just preempted so many of the complaints or issues that we might have had, because people understand why we did it, right? And I think that's an important role that we can play as kind of that context translator.
I love that idea of being a source of why, right? Like, I think that is super important. Like the easiest way to lose people is to say just because, right? Like, and I think that's super critical. So I wanted to touch on one aspect, particularly Lizzie, you and Marcos can speak to this. You've been a team of one and are transitioning out of that, which is awesome. I think one of the challenges of being a team of one, besides being a team of one, is that you have, probably starting out, you've been brought into the organization, you got a lot of access at an early stage because you're a team of one, because they hired one person to do this stuff when they needed one person to do this stuff. But then as the company suddenly gets larger, then you've got more stakeholders like we talked about, but you've probably got more layers between you and senior leadership, some layers that get added on top, maybe a really aggressive board that has all kinds of things that they're asking for, that sort of thing. So how do you all think about, as you transition from a team of one to a team of many, to like managing up, managing down, managing left, right, diagonally, all of those things? So I don't know, either one of you start. Lizzie, why don't you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I got some feedback about this recently, and so if there are any sort of teams of one on the call, you can kind of learn from my experience here. What is a success pattern in a team of one in a RevOps org is like extreme ownership, that you get things done and you don't wait for other people to do their jobs. That was my success pattern for the first year, and it'll be any team of one's failure mode as they sort of like scope to build a team and your scope increases, because you cannot like take that extreme ownership mode, and own more of RevOps as like your scope increases. So I'd say one thing is step out of the tactical aggressively and as fast as possible. There are things that are going to burn, but I think stepping out of the tactical and into the strategic is really important. So I think that's the one thing, just around transitioning from that team of one outside. To your point, Hayes, around, how do you actually manage upward when you're starting to lose access to those senior people? I'm going to make a really controversial statement here. I think like a weekly or monthly check-in with people who are on your executive team are probably the fastest way to lose like relevance and respect. I have a very controversial opinion that when you get a meeting that is occurring more than 5 or 6 times, unless it's for the purposes of forecasting or something that's really tactical, people actually start to lose focus and interest. Unless of course it's like a one-on-one with a regular report. So the way that I think about access, particularly with my CEO, I report into our head of revenue, so that's a little bit different. But I ask for like a 30-minute call at really random intervals. It might be a Friday at like 5 p.m. when she's, finished all of her calls for the day, and we candidly just catch up. But I also get a feeling for what their biggest challenges are for the year, for the upcoming quarter, year, month, whatever that might be. And then you very clearly align those are your OKRs and initiatives around what that person really, really cares about, and make sure you're then communicating back to them like, this is how we're moving the needle on that. It's really, really important that you are perceived as an ops leader that is solving the most important problems, not just the stuff that you get slacks about really often. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that my CEO and head of revenue cares about the most is individual rep enablement and attainment. And so if there's a week that goes by that I don't spend any energy on that, I know I'm not solving the problems that they care about. I know that sounds, again, a little bit political and over-optimizing for optics, but if they believe that's truly the thing that's going to move the company, it's our job really to operationalize that. So those are my things. Just in summary, extreme ownership may be a success mode. It will be your failure mode. Get out of the tactical quickly, because senior leaders just do not see that. And then making sure you're solving what they perceive to be the really important problems.
You have to add to that. I know you've been in the same boat.
Yeah, I mean, Lizzie kind of hit it right on the head there, but I think kind of somewhere where I will differentiate a little bit is I tend to tell senior leaders that, if at any point you are going to say revenue operations can handle this, or Marcos can handle this, and I am not in this meeting, then it's probably not going to get done. So you need to kind of voice that, if there's going to be a discussion where things are going to be put on the plate by senior leadership, don't be afraid to tell them, like, hey, pull me in the meeting if it's, last minute, or if you like to put this on our plate, let me join this meeting. And it's certainly, it has definitely certainly helped, particularly for us when we're fully remote. And so all these meetings happen via Zoom in various time zones. Our senior leadership is primarily in EMEA, and I'm based in San Francisco. So that's an 8-hour difference that they're having conversations in the morning, and I'm hopefully not having dreams about numbers and spreadsheets and things like that. So it's really, having that communication and being, if they're going to have an early morning meeting about something that might land on RevOps plate, I make an effort to go and say, okay, hey, we need to have a discussion afterwards. Or, if they're going to have an afternoon meeting and I can join that, then great. Well, let's have that discussion while we're there. But it should always be, don't be afraid to push leadership to have that talk, and just present it as a way of, I'm trying to better understand how you want this problem solved, or how this problem, why is this a problem, and kind of get to that point. Sometimes it's not going to be the CEO. I mean, I certainly don't have conversations every single day with our CEO. I probably have very few conversations with him or them. But our head of sales, I'm always in communications with. This month, I started reporting under our CFO. And so we're beginning to have conversations to that end. And he's based out in Dubai. So very different time zones. And just being able to be present in those conversations that are going to be had, don't be afraid to kind of stick your nose. I think, we talked about RevOps being a political role in some sense. There comes a point in time as a senior RevOps person that when you're pushing away the tactical stuff and going more strategic, that you're going to have to, kind of put your nose in the ring and be your own voice, I like to say. And otherwise, it's just going to be, you're going to be the dumpster that the dumpster fire lives with. So you don't want to be that.
The dumpster that they put all the other dumpster fires in.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so this is we saved probably the most important topic for the last 7 minutes, unfortunately, but this has been a really great conversation so far. But I think we talked about moving from a team of one, and that idea of like that extreme ownership of an individual, right, becomes the failure mode, right? So I think one of the first questions you've got to ask is, when do I hire, right? Like, when is it time? And hopefully, I'm curious, Drew, if you have some thoughts on that. And I hope the answer is more than like when I get budget, but like, so I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I'm in a fortunate position that because I own the budget, I was able to carve out a lot for my own team. But but I think, the sign for me was when any one part of the job starts to dominate others to the exclusion of other things that need to get done, right? So, why when we need a full-time Salesforce admin, it's because we have enough reps who have issues with Salesforce, we have new processes we need to implement, all these things that have become, or enough reporting needs from leadership that, it's just, you have one person who used to do a little bit of everything, who now is an 80-90% of their time is just on Salesforce related stuff. That is a really big indication for me. I think this goes back to what I said earlier too about, I think it's really important for revenue ops to work closely with sales leadership to understand what their hiring plans are and what the growth plans are for the business. I mean, you already ideally should be plugged into that, but understanding not just the numbers, but really the head count and where they're going to go, because that'll be your earliest warning sign that you're going to need to hire. Because I don't know the exact ratios, but you could probably figure out what the right ratio of sales headcount to operations people you need is, and model it off of that. But being able to see around the curve a little bit of what the growth is going to look like this year and beyond is really going to be your biggest indicator. But yeah, it's, like, I think you can get away with generalists or a team of one at a certain stage, but I just think it partly depends on the span of control. And one of the things that we just took on in recent months was the partner operations side of things. So, we had to have a conversation about, well, we can take that on, but we didn't budget for somebody who's going to own partner operations, and we can't just fit that into what our team already does without dropping other things. And so we had to have that budget conversation too, and make sure that was accounted for before we agreed to take that on. So that's really it. I would say the biggest warning sign is if the team is doubling in size from an overall sales perspective, and you're not, at least increasing your team size by 50%, then you're going to have that time.
So got a little bit of Lizzie and Marco. So I'm going to do a little 2-minute drill here with you guys. So Lizzie, question for you. And I get this question a lot from a lot of different RevOps folks, but I think you're in it right now. So what roles do you think you should hire first when you move from a team of one? And it may not be one size fits all, but I'm curious your thoughts. How do you focus that hiring decision on when you have just a handful of roles you can go hire?
Yeah. So I have gotten a ton of advice about this. There's sort of like two schools of thought. Maybe there's more, but there's two that I've been exposed to. One is to think about yourself as like a team. And so understanding your own strengths and weaknesses and then hiring for the weakness. So a good example is that I am a self-taught Salesforce admin. And so actually the first role that I've hired, and welcome Ryan, is a senior Salesforce admin who's going to own our like sales stack. The other way to think about this is actually to sit down, I think a little bit what Drew was speaking about earlier, and write down a list of everything that you do in a day and how much time that takes. And then if you can kind of start grouping those, that actually becomes a job description. And so when you get to sort of, a significant amount, a portion of your time that you're spending on those sorts of things, you go and basically hire someone to solve that problem. And so there's one's a little bit more self-centered way of thinking about it, and the other's a little bit more around what need you're seeing. The problem with the second school of thought, obviously, is it's not forward-looking to what the business is going to need in 6 months. And so in my experience, the biggest failure mode of actually not even RevOps teams, but just like go-to-market in general, is not hiring ahead of demand. And because it takes time to ramp someone. So I would say school of thought one with strengths and weaknesses is probably a little bit stronger, but be 3-4 months ahead of the need. I think it's really important. I hope I got that under 2 minutes.
I think you did. So Marcos, I'll toss this to you as the last question. The other thing I hear from folks when I'm talking to other RevOps folks is they say, first of all, like, who should I hire? What should I hire? And then once they decide who to hire, hiring is like impossible. It's very, very competitive for good folks, whether it's Salesforce skills or whether it's analyst skills, whatever it is. The market is just incredibly competitive right now. So, I mean, you've been able to successfully, add folks to your team. What's your, any recommendations for people who are trying to add to their RevOps team in this economy for recruiting?
Yeah, well, I'm going to evangelize omnipresent here for a little bit, because this is kind of this is where our bread and butter lies. Is solving for pretty much this issue, is knowing that it's a competitive market, particularly here in the United States, and budgets might be tight with this economy. And so, how do you get the most value for the with the limited budget that you have, and with all the expertise that you need? And so with Omnipresent, we kind of utilize our own tool to do this. And I've been lucky to be able to basically hire anywhere in the world, and hire for any position in the world. So for me, I had a need for 2 Salesforce analysts, and I just needed them to fit within the budget that I was given. And it was a very tight budget to squeeze in the expertise in with the headcount that I needed. Luckily, we were able to find a great analyst in we interviewed him. He was in Poland. He has since moved to London, Will. And then we hired another person in Canada who's going to be moving to Italy here shortly in the next few months. I've been tasked to build out a few more headcounts where we're looking for a BI person, someone in APAC, and then as well an SDR ops person probably in the near future. And luckily with Omnipresent, I'm able to open it up to all candidates around the world. And so I'm not prioritizing strictly location. I'm prioritizing the expertise that I need. And so I would say, if you don't have that luxury, but budget might kind of be where you're looking at, but there are platforms out there and tools out there to allow you as a revenue operations professional to not be limited to your budget, but really hiring the expertise and the right person that you need, because it'll just, like we've discussed throughout this whole time, that if you're strictly trying to solve for the now, And that now in this hiring sense is, what fits in your budget, and not hiring for the future, and making sure you have the right person that's going to grow in your company and grow in that role and be the successful person that you want them to be. Then you might be looking to hire another person or someone else in the next year, or the next 2 years, or the next 3 months. And you don't want that to be the case. So I always, when you're looking at hiring, you always want to make sure that you're hiring the right people in the right time. And certainly in this day and age with COVID and everything, location shouldn't be the deciding factor.
Awesome. Well, Marcos, I believe you get the last word. Lizzie, Drew, Marcos, really appreciate the time today. I think there was a lot here for folks who are experiencing the same challenges that you are. So thanks so much for sharing. All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.